I've kept, and I usually don't keep case files, but this is one case that's been open. It's been on my mind for a long time.
I believe in my heart that Jeff Crotein had to have known and had to have had a hand in what happened to Ramona Crotein that night. I don't think Ramona went home that night. I think she was murdered in the parking lot of the Clarion Hotel by Jeff's accomplice. I think Jeff met him at the Rapid Station and then gave him a ride home and then went home himself. I believe if the police wanted to, they could solve this case in the next month. They have blood from underneath the handle of the car that's not Ramona's. The profile's never been pulled. They could do genetic genealogy. In my opinion, they could have the answer next month. Wouldn't it be weird if it wasn't Jeff Crotein, that he had nothing to do with it? He just looked so guilty. If it wasn't him, you know, that would be an astounding end to the story.
People in the Cleveland area continue to debate whether Jeff Crotein got away with murder or if Ramona Crotein was the victim of a robbery gone wrong and her killer is still out there. But there's one haunting aspect of this case that cannot be debated. Ramona Crotein never got justice. I'm Tamron Hall. Thank you for watching Someone They Knew.
Tonight on Closing Arguments, in Portland, Oregon, Nancy Brophy wrote an essay called How to Murder Your Husband. Now she's accused of actually doing it. We have the latest from the romance novelist murder trial.
What did you see? I saw Chef Brody on the ground on his back.
In Broward County, Florida, jury selection continues in the penalty phase of Nicholas Cruz's trial. Today, the judge ruling the jurors will go back to the scene at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, where 17 people were slain on Valentine's Day 4 years ago.
I believe it's your decision to decide where I go, whether I live or die. Not the jury's. I believe it's your decision. I'm sorry.
On the docket tonight, in Fairfax County, Virginia, movie star Johnny Depp getting ready for his upcoming trial on Court TV. Depp is suing his ex, Amber Heard, for defamation after she accused him of domestic violence. Tonight, we look at a possible defense for Amber Heard.
It has been incredibly painful to relive the breakup of my relationship, to have my motives, my truth questioned.
Plus, Nancy Brophy wrote an article called How to Murder Your Husband before being accused of killing hers. But the judge ruled the piece won't come in at trial. Tonight, we ask you, the 13th juror, should the jury see the article? Buckle your seatbelts. This hour of Closing Arguments starts right now. Good evening and welcome to Closing Arguments. I'm Michael Ayala in tonight for Vinnie Politan. Now, today marked the second day of the romance novelist murder trial. Author Nancy Brophy is accused of killing her husband, Dan Brophy, after 26 years of marriage. Now, prosecutors say she murdered Dan for financial gain. Now, interestingly, years before, Chef Brody was found shot to death in the culinary school where he taught. Nancy wrote an essay titled How to Murder Your Husband, which reads in part, motives, financial. This is big. Divorce is expensive, and do you really want to split your possessions? Or if you married for money, aren't you entitled to all of it? The drawback is the police aren't stupid. They are looking at you first. So you have to be organized, ruthless, and very clever. I'm telling you, folks, you can't make this stuff up. Understandably, the defense fought hard to keep the article out, arguing it was written 11 years before the murder of Dan Brophy as part of a writing workshop. Yesterday, the judge agreed with the defense, ruling the article would not be included in the evidence at trial. Meanwhile, the prosecution continued their case today by calling more students from the Oregon Culinary Institute who discovered Dan Brophy's body the day he died.
We were just, I think We were just sitting, I think, waiting for class to start. And then at first I was heard laughing, giggling, you know, like a normal morning. And then all of a sudden I heard, "Help me." And at first I thought they were joking. And then I heard it again, and then I saw one of my classmates, Katie, run past the window, because we have a window in our classroom, and she ran past it on the phone, and she's on the phone 911. Then I realized, you know, maybe there was something more.
Clorinda was kneeling down by Chef. So I told her she needed to start compressions. And then she did that, and I walked out of the room. And then one of my classmates was coming through the building, and I kind of pushed him back out and told him not to go in there. Lights were on, and there was water running, I believe.
And what did you see?
I seen Jeff Brophy on the floor.
Court TV crime and justice reporter Matt Johnson is joining us now live from Portland, Oregon. Matt, I found out that at one point during your career, you actually worked in Portland, Oregon. That's one of the great things about being a reporter and anchor. You get to work in many different cities. And today, I understand that you actually went out and visited the crime scene. Tell us about that.
Absolutely did. Michael, good evening, and good evening to you at home. Yeah, I served this community for more than 4 years. Very familiar with the Southwest Portland area. So I went there yesterday, and it was pouring rain in true Portland fashion. And I wanted to show you exactly where this murder took place. We're hearing a lot about the inside of the building, and we're going to hear more about the outside as they start revealing that surveillance video that will be presented in court. Take a look. On June 2nd, 2018, Daniel Brophy went to work like any other Saturday over at the Oregon Culinary Institute. Today, it is called a Blue Star Donut. Around 7:20, surveillance cameras from across the street show that he parked right here in front of this side entrance. After turning off the alarm at the side entrance, Daniel walks through the building, which was described as a labyrinth, but many people would find confusing, and he unlocks this roll-up door. Prosecutors allege that this is how Nancy Brophy got inside that morning. Investigators say that he died after being shot twice in the back kitchen of this building, where he was filling up buckets with ice and water, preparing for class. It was later that morning that he would be found by the first students to arrive. And according to court documents, there were no cameras inside that facility or immediately outside. But what we're going to see more of as there is more testimony and more evidence presented in court, and they kind of alluded to this in opening statements, is that down the street over at the Max line, there is a public transit on this street, and across the street over at a pizza place. That's where police say they recognize Nancy driving her car the morning of the murder.
Oh, strong evidence against the defense basically claims that it wasn't hers. We'll have to see how that pans out. All right, also, tell us about Nancy and her attorneys today.
So Nancy, she seems to be fixated on staring at people in court. When she walks in before the jury is present, when her attorneys start putting on her sweater for her and they take off her handcuffs, we can't show you that sort of thing. She puts on her boots. She eyes people that are in the gallery. She stares at me. I don't know why, maybe because I worked here before. And then she stares at Nancy's mother-in-law, who sits in the front row each and every day. And then, of course, when the jury is present, she sits across from them at the corner of the defense table, staring at them, which is just about 4 feet away from where the witness testifies. It's kind of a strange setup.
Did you get the sense that this staring was an intimidation type of thing, or just maybe a nervous habit? Any sense at all of where that's coming from?
I really don't know, but so I sought out one of her defense attorneys as they were walking by. I asked Lisa Maxfield a couple questions, and I said, you know, first off, why was there so many delays in this case? Was it all because of COVID? She said no, because Lisa had a medical problem herself. That delayed some of this. And then I also asked, well, how is Nancy holding up? I mean, she kind of stares at people, she stares at me, and she goes, well, she's holding up as expected. These are very serious charges.
All right, yeah, makes sense. All right, now, Matt, today was really highlighted by a lot of emotional testimony, again, from students at the Culinary Institute. Fill us in on some of that.
Yeah, so several of the students will wait for each other to testify. Say one goes first, and then the next one will wait in the lobby, and then they will walk out together and hug. They seem to cry outside of the presence of the jury. Understandable, because they're reliving all of this, right? And then they walk outside. That's where Court TV and other reporters are allowed to talk to them. I did speak with Clarenda Perez and also Miranda Bernhard. They didn't want to speak on camera. That's Clarenda that you're looking at right there. You could just feel the emotion in the courtroom. It was palpable. But I also did get to meet up with Courtney Arias. Her husband was in her line of sight when she was testifying today. He made sure to show her support. I met up with both of them outside on the courthouse steps, and I asked how she's holding up. This is part of our conversation. Talk to me about preparing for today.
I mean, just the challenge. It's a little hard.
Yeah.
To relive it, she said, so that's about it, you know.
Did you know Mr. Brophy?
Not very well.
How have you been holding up these couple years?
Just a day at a time.
How was it to be asked questions and know that Mrs. Brophy is like just a couple feet away? I know that that's probably tough too.
To be honest, a little nerve-wracking.
The challenge.
Were you surprised by that? I'm kind of surprised by that.
I didn't expect that myself, but yeah.
Is there any other message that you have for the Brophy family, or like I know that this is something that you have thought about a lot. Is there something that they haven't asked you, or is there?
No, I just want them to know that I'm praying for them and I'm sorry for the loss.
One of those family members is Karen Brophy, the mother of victim Daniel Brophy. She sits again in the front row each and every day. We're hearing that she may testify tomorrow. Remember, in opening statements, that prosecutors said that she was the one that called Nancy and said, why aren't you going down there if you think that there was a shooting at your husband's workplace? So I wonder if that's part of the testimony that we'll hear there. But again, everybody's surprised how close they have to testify just a few feet away from Nancy as she's staring at them.
Yeah, it has to be difficult. And finally, one thing that's come through in a lot of the students' testimony is that obviously Dan Brophy was well liked. So what can you tell me about the community's reaction to his death?
Well, I know this community very well. I can tell you that not only are people into running and outdoors, and that everyone always talks about the fact that, you know, Portland is a rain town, but it's also a big culinary hub. When you think of food trucks, this is where it all started in the Pacific Northwest. Tiny houses, this is where it all started. That's how they got the idea for food trucks. Every single major chef across the country had a restaurant here at one point in time, and they all would have known Daniel Brophy. He is an educator, he's a big farmer, and he was a big philanthropist in helping out up-and-coming students and people that were getting their restaurants off the ground. So he was kind of a big deal in this community, and people really know him. Now, as for his wife, that aspiring romance novelist, it's quite the contrary. I mean, she was at all of the fairs here in town, selling her books, and yet, I visited all of the large bookstores here in town, including Powell's, which used to be the largest used bookstore in the world, they said, and they didn't have not one of her books on the shelves. So it's kind of like she's getting fame by being in this trial versus her writing.
Wow, yeah, that's great stuff there, Matt. I truly appreciate all the work you're doing out there. Great work. Thank you so much for that. Let me let you go now. Let me bring in my think tank joining us tonight in Atlanta, Georgia, criminal defense attorney and former federal prosecutor and law professor at Texas Southern University, Michael Sterling. In Seattle, Washington, trial attorney Ann Bremner, and in West Palm Beach, Florida, former police lieutenant and trial attorney Rick King. Thank you all for being with me tonight. You know, this is a relatively new trial and had a chance to really touch base with you guys. So first and foremost, I want to get your thoughts on the trial. Michael Sterling, I'll begin with you.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be interesting. I thought the judge's ruling this morning was extremely interesting, Michael, where the judge essentially said, look, this, essay from 10 years ago, or 11 years ago, rather, can't come in, called How to Murder Your Husband. I thought that if it had come into evidence, it would have been a big win for prosecutors, at least for the trial, but certainly would have created a appealable issue for the defense team later on. And so I thought that that was extremely interesting. But I also think, as you pointed out earlier, what's interesting is how close they're sitting to the defendant. Typically in trials, prosecutors sort of sit closer to the jury and the witnesses, and oftentimes, even as defense attorney, usually there's something in the middle that kind of blocks your view, and so you have to kind of look around and peek around. They just try to make it uncomfortable for defense attorneys, it seems like, in courtrooms, and so it is interesting how close the witnesses are having to sit next to her, and I think that, these things, trials are full of human emotions and full of little subtleties that you don't think about that can really make a difference in a case.
And Bremner, Michael makes a great point. That's no small thing. You could obviously see in some way it was affecting at least one witness we know of.
Yeah. Well, the jury, it just say that she's staring at everybody and she's in such close proximity. I don't know if you ever saw the show Portlandia, but this trial reminds me of that. I tried a lot of cases in Portland. I'm up here in Seattle and I've represented Portland police. Their motto down there is, keep it weird. And the Culinary Institute's a huge deal, like you just heard about. Powell's Bookstore. And then you've got this romance, novelist. And then, all these, high points and points of interest in Portland. And then when you try a case down there, there's a statue of an elk out in front of the courthouse. They removed it after all the protests, but it's like, that is so Portland. You know what I mean? So it's like Portlandia. What a weird case that would only happen in Portland.
Yeah, Rick King, she makes a great point. It's an interesting place, a little bit different. The story is a little bit different. But for me, the fact that she's a mystery, sort of romance writer, almost gives this defense built-in reasonable doubt. All the things that the circumstantial evidence that the state is pointing to, not all of it, but a lot of it, is stuff that they can just put under the heading, hey, she was just doing research for one of her books.
Right, and that's apparently what she's been saying to answer a lot of these questions, things that she was researching, and the essay that she wrote 11 years ago. I agree with Michael. That was very interesting to the judge's ruling in that, probative versus the prejudicial value of what they were trying to bring in, and I think it was the right ruling. But I also noticed, like everyone else did, the configuration of the courtroom. And I think that led to one of the things that I noticed this morning when I watched some of the testimony, the emotions of the witnesses. Every witness that I watched became very emotional. And sometimes as practitioners, we see that often, but the people at home sometimes don't realize how emotional those trials can become for those witnesses who are reliving those events, for probably the second or third time that it's happened in front of them. So it's an interesting trial so far as it unfolds.
Yeah, and Michael Sterling, the fact that they are emotional, I think, is an important part of the state's case. At the end of the day, the takeaway for me after listening to some of the students testify is just how serious this is. Oftentimes, when the jury doesn't quite understand, you need them to understand just how serious and awful the crime is. And I think that's been established for sure with these first few witnesses.
Yeah, I agree with that, Mike. It's been clearly established, and the emotional aspect, even though there's probably going to be a jury instruction that says you want to consider sympathy. It's called sort of a jury instruction that's given in cases around the country that you want to have sympathy for one party or the other in making your decision. Certainly, people are human, right? So whether you're told that or not, you remember the emotional testimony, you remember the tears, you remember how people felt about the individual who lost their life. So that emotion, as humans, you are allowed to bring your personal experiences into that jury room. And so that certainly plays a part in how jurors, conduct their deliberation and the way in which they contextualize what actually happened in a particular case.
Yeah, and again, tomorrow we'll continue with testimony in the romance novelist murder trial. We're going to take a break right now, guys. The think tank is going to be staying with me for the whole hour. And when we come back, jury selection in the trial of the Parkland school shooter. Going to have more information on that, so keep it right here on Closing Argument.
Journey at Nutrafol.com.
And I hope you give me a chance to try to help others. If I believe it's your decision to decide where I go and whether I live or die. Not the jury's. I believe it's your decision. I'm sorry.
That, of course, was Nicholas Cruz after entering his guilty plea for 17 counts of first-degree murder and 17 counts of attempted first-degree murder for the February 14th shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School back in 2018. Now, jury selection in that case continued today. It will be up to the jury to recommend whether Cruz should face the death penalty or life in prison for his crimes. Court TV legal correspondent Shanley Painter has more on the background of this case.
911, what is your emergency?
It's Valentine's Day 2018.
They believe there's a shooter at the school.
Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School is under siege. An active shooter is terrorizing the campus. It was just a normal day at school that suddenly turned to a nightmare for the city of Parkland, Florida. The massacre marked the deadliest high school shooting in U.S. history. Surveillance video and witness identification led to the arrest of then 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz.
He was in my class in 7th grade, and I knew he wasn't okay when he punched the window in and said, "I'm going to cause karma one day," because he got in trouble with the teacher.
Cruz was a former student at the school. He'd been expelled the year before, in February 2017, for disciplinary reasons. But records indicate he was a troubled person long before the massacre.
He was a huge threat to the school because of his behavior. When he was suspended, they found shells of bullets in his backpack.
Just 40 days earlier, a woman who knew Cruz told the FBI he was collecting guns and ammunition and feared he was, quote, going to slip into a school and start shooting the place up. What's more, investigative reports point to years of a disturbing digital trail. Cruz reportedly researched mass shootings and posted threatening messages all over the internet. This one says, "I'm going to be a professional school shooter." In fact, it would be those very phone records as well as school surveillance video that would help authorities piece together what they say happened. A little after 2 p.m., Cruz took an Uber from his home to the school about 3 miles away. Security video shows a male wearing black jeans, maroon shirt, vest, and hat, carrying a large black bag, enter Building 12. In the first floor stairwell, he takes out an AR-15 rifle. Just then, a student walks in, sees the gun, and hurries out. At 2:21 p.m., school video shows the active shooter terrorizing all 3 floors of the freshman building, taking the lives of 14 teenagers and 3 adults. Alerted by a fire alarm and what sounded like gunshots, the school resource officer, the only other person armed with a weapon on campus, makes his way towards the building, but does not go in.
We started hearing more and more shots, so then everyone started running.
Minutes later, the shooting finally stops. The suspect drops the weapon and tactical gear, and authorities say he left campus, blending in to the crowd. Police hadn't even entered the building yet. At 3:36 p.m., more than an hour later, Cruz was stopped and arrested. Authorities interrogate Cruz and appear to secure a confession. He is charged with 17 counts of first-degree premeditated murder and 17 counts of attempted murder. During hours-long questioning, Cruz informs the detective he hears voices in his head that tell him to
burn, kill, destroy.
Cruz now faces the death penalty at trial.
I understand fully what you're saying.
Okay, are you having any trouble concentrating?
No.
Now, today there was a very important ruling by the presiding judge, that the jury will be able to tour the scene of the crime, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. Now, the defense argued the tour was unnecessary because videos and photos of the crime scene are available, and the defendant has already pleaded guilty. But Circuit Judge Elizabeth Schur rejected the defense's argument, writing, "The court finds that a jury view of the crime scene remains useful and proper, even in light of the current posture of the case. The purpose of a jury view is to assist the jury in analyzing and applying the evidence presented at trial." All right, let's bring back in the think tank to break this all down. Still with me, criminal defense attorney and former federal prosecutor and Texas law professor at Texas Southern University, Michael Sterling, trial attorney Ann Bremner, and former police lieutenant and trial attorney Rick King. Ann, I'll start with you. What do you think about the judge's ruling here? She called it useful and proper. Do you think it's appropriate?
Absolutely. And the jury instruction they'll get is that a view of the scene is not evidence. Exactly that. It's basically can be used by you to look at all of the evidence before you. It goes to their decision at sentencing, whether it's factual during the trial on a guilt or not guilty. The sentencing itself, also, they've got to make factual determinations in a death penalty. Absolutely. I think she did exactly the right thing.
Rick King, I want to get you to ring in on this. I mean, my feeling is, again, I kind of agree with the defense. It's kind of the way I think. I thought with pictures, et cetera, that was enough for this jury. There's a lot of really terrible evidence in this case. Your thoughts on the judge's ruling?
So we have to keep in mind that in this case, there was no trial. So the jury has to be given the facts of the case. Now, I tend to agree with you in the sense that I think the pictures of the crime scene and the pictures of the building and that what they would see now in some sort of walkthrough might be a little bit over. However, I think the prosecution's point in this is they want the jurors to really get the full, and I hate to use the word, the prosecution theater of what this is. Because they want them to be there and to live it and to really get the full feeling of what was happening. As a defense lawyer, I think that we would be like, hey, I think you can look at these pictures and really get a grasp of where it was. I'm not certain that it's furthering the interest of justice by taking them there.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you. Now, Michael Sterling, to further Rick's point, to give this jury the full picture, the judge has staked out over 3 months or 3 months or so for this penalty phase. Do you have any issues at all with that? I mean, there's a lot to be put in front of them, obviously. They didn't have a regular trial. There's a lot of aggravating factors, things like interfering with government functions. Crime was especially heinous. It was committed without the pretense of moral or legal justification. All those things have to be proven. But 3 months for the penalty phase?
Yeah, that's a lot of time, Michael. But I understand a death penalty case does require a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to find death penalty qualified jurors. So I do understand why the judge has staked out time, and I imagine
Hold up, Michael. Let me stop you there. The trial is going to begin May 31st. So she's given all that time between now and the trial will begin May 31st. She doesn't expect it to take till May 31st, but she's given all that time. Then from the time the trial starts, May 31st, she's given until September for the trial part. So it's not including jury selection.
Oh, right, of course. So, but I do think that because of juror selection, finding death qualified jurors, and then the trial, the thing that I'm never going to understand, Michael, is why a defense attorney takes a guilty plea in a case where there's only two options, life in prison or the death penalty. You might as well take it to trial, right? Because you're going to have the death penalty phase anyway in front of the juror. I'm never going to understand a guilty plea in a case where you haven't already negotiated the life in prison without the possibility of parole as opposed to the death penalty. Because if those are the only two options anyways, I might as well hold you to your burden of proof and see if we can get some sort of defense. Well, clear, like for example, in a case like this where, guilt is almost clear in terms of the acts, then you go to whether or not there's the mental state of the defendant who says that he heard voices in his head, and whether or not there's a potential psychological defense as to whether or not he had what we call the mens rea, right? Every criminal act requires mens rea, actus rea. Whether or not he had the actual mental capacity, right, to commit this crime. But to answer your question, I'm not surprised that it's going to take take that long. This is a highly publicized case. The prosecution is likely to call somewhere between 75 to 100 witnesses, right? They're going to be cross-examined by the defense. This affected a lot of people. It's a public place. So when you look at the witnesses, expert witnesses, mitigating factors, aggravating factors, I'm not surprised that it's going to take that long. And I think the judge is probably trying to be prudent by letting the jurors know exactly what they're going to face in terms of how often they're going to have to come to trial during this penalty phase.
Yeah, no question. I think what the judge is obviously doing is she's giving this whole community a chance to heal through this penalty phase because they didn't get it on the other side because of the guilty plea. So I think we're going to see basically a trial. All right, think tank, stand by. We do have to take a quick break, but here's a look at what's still ahead on Closing Argument. On the docket tonight, in Fairfax County, Virginia, movie star Johnny Depp getting ready for his upcoming trial on Court TV. Depp is suing his ex, Amber Heard, for defamation after she accused him of domestic violence. Tonight, we look at a possible defense for Amber Heard.
It has been incredibly painful to relive the breakup of my relationship, to have my motives, my truth questioned.
Plus, Nancy Brophy wrote an article called How to Murder Your Husband Before Being Accused of Killing Hers. But the judge ruled the piece won't come in at trial. Tonight, we ask you, the 13th juror, should the jury see the article?
Johnny was hitting me, and he was hitting me hard and repeatedly.
Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard.
This is going to be one of those big trials to watch.
You have these big celebrities that are going to be testifying.
Their reputations are at stake.
Johnny Depp was not successful across the pond, but he's got a second bite of the apple, this time in the United States.
Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard. Live coverage starting Monday morning at 9/8 Central on Court TV.
Well, there you saw it. On the docket tonight is the upcoming civil trial of Johnny Depp versus his ex-wife Amber Heard. Depp is suing Heard for defamation after she allegedly accused him of domestic violence in a Washington Post editorial. Now, Amber Heard has come forward asserting that her article is protected under the First Amendment and state anti-SLAPP laws. SLAPP is an acronym for Strategic Lawsuits Against Public Participation. Now, these laws are aimed at stopping people from suing journalists or others from addressing important issues in public forums. Now, Heard addresses the issue in her counterclaim. She says Mrs. Heard's op-ed is true and accurate and plainly relates to matters of public concern that are protected under the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. Fundamentally, and contrary to the premise of Depp's defamation claim, the op-ed was not about Depp or his violent conduct against Mrs. Heard. It was about Ms. Heard and what happened to her after she came forward. Based on her experiences as a woman who had reported a man for violence, the op-ed described how institutions protect men accused of abuse and how society reacts wrathfully to women who speak out. Now, Depp tried to block Heard from making the argument to the jury that her op-ed was in fact protected speech, but after a hearing, the judge ruled in favor of Heard, and now the jury will get to decide if her speech is entitled to immunity and was in fact from Depp's defamation lawsuit. All right, let's bring back in the think tank to get their take on this issue. Still with me, Michael Sterling, Ann Bremner, and Rick King. Ann, let me start with you. Do you think this argument that, in fact, her statements were of public concern and therefore are immune from this kind of lawsuit, will that resonate with this jury?
I think that, Michael, with the way the courts have been dealing with what is called anti-SLAPP statute in my state, but the way the courts have been dealing with that, I think the answer is yes, that she's going to benefit from that, because even though it seems to be protecting speech just like in a public forum about public representatives or issues, it's really far more broad than that. And so I think this application, as given by the judge to the jury, I think it's appropriate under the law, and it's in keeping with what we've seen other courts come down, how they come down with the statute. It's broad.
Now, Michael Sterling, not only is it a strong ruling for the defense, but I think it undercuts a lot of what Johnny Depp is arguing, that this was a personal attack. Now, she never names him specifically in the article. I think it's pretty clear, and other news outlets have said that it was about him, but she doesn't name him. But it does undercut his claim that it is very personal to him. What do you think about this ruling and how it's going to affect his approach to this case?
Yeah, I thought the ruling was interesting. I thought that the argument of it being protected speech would be more of a argument of law that would be decided by the court, as opposed to an argument that would go to the jury. So I thought the idea that it being protected speech under the First Amendment, I mean, jurors are really, they're the fact finders, right? They're supposed to be determining whether or not she said something about him that was harmful to his reputation, that caused him damage, right? But here, the judge is placing squarely on the juror the obligation to determine whether or not her speech is protected under the First Amendment, which can be a complicated issue for jurors, right? It seems more like this would have been in the purview of the court to decide, and then if it was protected speech, then all of a sudden we really don't have a case here. So I don't know if it's because of when the motion was raised or when the issue was brought up before the court that they decided to let her make this argument, but it really seems, Michael, like it should have fallen within the purview of whether or not this is a legal argument that requires the dismissal of the lawsuit altogether.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking the entire day as I was researching it. Then I realized that the judge was actually giving this over to the jury, and I was surprised as well, Michael. Rick, let me go to you now, because another issue that I think Depp has to deal with here is the fact that he lost a lawsuit in the UK. Now, Heard did try to get this lawsuit in the U.S. dismissed based on the findings there. They basically found that her claims of about 14 different assaults were substantially true. So she tried to get this one dismissed. They said no. But do you think that's going to play a role, or the decision out there in the UK, will that play a role in this trial?
I think it has to. I think there was a court, and there's precedence about what happened in the past and what that court decided, and I think it's got to come in here. And I think it's really going to undermine Johnny Depp's case. You had a whole trial versus the Sun in the UK, where they determined that these allegations that she made were substantially true. And I think that comes and plays a factor in this.
You know what's interesting about this, Ann Bremner, is when you talk about this, you know, the activity that's being alleged here is actual criminal activity. But there weren't any criminal actions based on this. But what's interesting is, you know who has the arrest record in this case? Amber Heard has an arrest record from a previous relationship. So as we've said, yes, the two of them are going to take the stand. They're going to be pointing the finger. How's that going to play out?
Well, exactly. I mean, and she is the one with the arrest record, and she also admitted to hitting him. It's tape recorded. You know, and so we've got that kind of evidence out there. And then finally, this is not the UK, this is the United States. And she basically defamed him by implication in that article. And he's just trying to get his reputation back in the US. And it's going to be a lot different than the other trial. So the Sun case is that she's basically testifying on behalf of the Sun because they called him a white beater. So that's a little bit different than here, where he's coming out with his guns a-blazing and saying, you defame me, I want my reputation back. I really have standing here. This is my case, and it's my case against you.
You know, Johnny Depp, you know, he obviously has all the money in the world, so money's not the issue here, but he's continuing to fight, Michael Sterling, and you got to admire that, I guess, on some level. Do you think if he wins this case, he'll be able to get his reputation back? I mean, he's starting to do small projects, but really he's been kicked out of a lot of big projects in Hollywood, not getting those types of jobs. Do you think he can get it back if he wins this?
I think that's possible, right? I mean, a trial is a search for the truth. The public airing of a lot of the things that he was accused of and what she actually did can come out. I mean, we have to remember that when she published this op-ed in 2018, we're talking about the height of the Me Too movement, right? So she says, hey, look, I'm somebody who's being oppressed, but we're at the height of when women were being supported, individuals who came out with these types of charges. And we saw, you know, for example, in the Chris Brown case, where someone came out with obvious false allegations, and there were receipts which demonstrated these were false allegations. What we've seen is some women taking advantage of the support and love that we're providing to victims. And I think it's important that we recognize the truth of women who have suffered too long in silence. But I also think that they shouldn't be undermined by individuals who come out with false allegations. And this trial will be an opportunity for us to see whether these allegations are false or true, because a trial is supposed to be a search for the truth.
You know, I think I've heard that somewhere before, Michael. Oh, that's right. That's one of Vinnie's favorite sayings, right? It's a search for the truth. And in fact, it is. All right, stand by, guys. A quick reminder, Court TV cameras will be inside the courtroom for this trial, which is set to begin next Monday, April 11th. And lead anchor Vinnie Politan will be live in Virginia next week as the trial gets underway, so you don't want to miss that. Right now, we do have to squeeze in a break, but when we come back, it'll be time to hear from you, our 13th juror.
Now.
I did want to rule on a motion that I took under advisement on Friday. I heard several motions that day, but the one that I had not ruled on concerned a blog post that the defendant wrote 11 years ago called How to Murder Your Husband. And we had heard testimony that the blog post had been written for a writer's workshop. Now, defense moved to exclude the blog post, and having fully considered the matter, I am going to grant the defense motion to the extent that the evidence is potentially admissible under Oregon Evidence Code 4043 as relevant for a non-propensity purpose to show the defendant's knowledge. I don't believe it survives the balancing test the court's required to undergo under Oregon Evidence Code 403. Any minimal probative value of an article written that long ago is substantially outweighed by the danger of unfair prejudice and confusion of the issues.
That was Judge Christopher Ramross's ruling that an article written by defendant Nancy Brophy in 2011 titled How to Murder Your Husband cannot come into evidence at her trial and therefore will not be shown to the jury. Nancy Brophy is accused, of course, of killing her husband Dan in order to collect more than $1.5 million in life insurance. The judge ruled that the How to Murder Your Husband article was more prejudicial than probative. But what do you guys think? So we posted this to our social media pages and we asked you, the 13th juror, should the jury be allowed to see Brophy's How to Murder Your Husband article? And we're going to begin, guys, with our 13th juror comment of the day. It comes from Lisa, who writes, I think this is one piece of the puzzle that helps prove her guilt. Just like the searches for ghost guns and parts and paying expensive life insurance policies, but not your mortgage. The totality of all these pieces point to her guilt, so leaving this piece out doesn't seem right. All right, Rick, let me start with you. Do you think the judge was right in keeping this out? We talked about this a little earlier, but as you heard his explanation, what do you think about it now?
So Michael Sterling said this in the very beginning, and I agree with him. The piece was written 11 years ago. And to me, that's the biggest linchpin of this whole thing. It wasn't if she wrote it last month or the week before the murder. This is 11 years ago, and she said, and I don't know if they were able to establish this as truth or not, but she claimed and said that it was part of a writing workshop. I don't know whether they substantiated that or not, but they said that, and based on that and the long time in past that it's been since she wrote the article, I think that it was properly kept out.
All right, our next comment comes from Sue, who writes, good call by the judge. She wrote it 11 years ago. I'm sure it's inflammatory no matter what, because she wrote it and her husband is dead. All right, Ann Bremner, just for argument's sake, let's say she wrote it 2 years ago. Do you think it comes in then?
I think so. It reminds me of my grandma used to call, what a quinky dink, what a coincidence. She writes about killing her husband and then her husband's dead. She kills him, So, yeah, I think it comes in. I think it's one piece of the puzzle, like another viewer said, and especially if it comes in from 2 years ago.
All right, let's go to our next comment. It's from RCK on Twitter. She says, if she testifies, she can be asked about subject matter of her work. She won the lottery on this decision. I'm tired of juries not being given all the information. We ask them to make life and death decisions, but don't trust them with all the info. That's an interesting point. It is a balancing act, Michael Sterling, and love to get your response to that, because sometimes it does seem like just let them have all the information. They can sort of sort it all out in terms of how much value they want to give it. But I do think there needs to be an arbiter of some sort.
Well, Michael, I wish we could pick jurors the way we do the 13th juror question here on Court TV, where they get the right things and they don't have to see you face to face. Because what we know from experience is that jurors give aspirational answers, right? The individuals who are writing on Court TV are telling you how they actually feel, which is what we really try to do earnestly as lawyers, is get jurors to actually tell you how they feel. And that's what you get from the 13th juror question. Now, the reason we don't give jurors all the information is not because we don't trust them with it, but is because the court rules are designed to put forward only that information which has the indicia of reliability, has the indicia of truthfulness, right? And whether or not it's relevant, and whether or not it's unfairly prejudicial, right? Which is why we have the rule 404B, which is why we have the balancing test under 403. So even if the judge says, hey, look, I believe you, this could be relevant to show knowledge, but when I do the balancing test, which unfortunately a lot of judges fail to get to that second part, when I do the balancing test on the 403, this is more unfairly prejudicial, right? Because there's always going to be information that's prejudicial. That's the whole point of the trial. But this is so unfairly prejudicial that it should be put in front of the jury to determine whether or not she committed this crime. And so that's why we don't give jurors some of the information, because you don't want them to be unfairly prejudiced against one party or the other.
Well, there it is, and I could not have said it better myself. All right, guys, I want to give a big thanks to the think tank today, Michael Sterling, Ann Bremner, and Rick King. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks for being with me tonight. All right, we do have to step aside now, folks, and take a quick break, but at the top of the hour, we're going to bring you our investigators as we take a look at new charges that have been filed against the father of a missing 7-year-old. That was Harmony Montgomery, and all that more when we return, so keep it right here on Court TV. In Manchester, New Hampshire, 7-year-old Harmony Montgomery was missing for 2 years before she was reported gone. Her father, Adam, charged with assault and now facing firearms charges, and still no sign of little Harmony.
Enough is enough. This is a 7-year-old girl. Let's find her.
In tonight's Unsolved Case File, an 18-year-old last seen walking down the street in Kokomo, Indiana on October 11th, 2016. Now, 5 years later, we are asking for your help to find out what happened to Karina Mcclurkin.
Karina existed. She was not our imagination.
In Sacramento, California, 2 suspects arrested in connection to a mass shooting that killed 6 people. We'll show you the video of the chaotic scene. And in Las Vegas, Nevada, a suspect is shot after charging towards officers. How did law enforcement handle this? Our experts weigh in during crime time.
Can you put me out on a 416, 2 males, and a 416 in front of Main and Four-Master?
Buckle your seatbelts. This hour of closing arguments starts right now. Welcome back to Closing Arguments. I'm Michael Ayala in tonight for Vinnie Politan. Now, we begin this hour with a missing child in New Hampshire. Harmony Montgomery was just 5 years old when she was last seen in 2019, but it wasn't until last fall, 2 years later, that she was reported missing. Now, on March 25th, the Manchester, New Hampshire Police Department announced the reward for information leading to Harmony has increased to $150,000. And now, new details on Adam Montgomery, Harmony's father. He's already charged with assaulting Harmony and is now facing new charges. We'll get to that in just a minute. First, here's Vinnie Politan with background on this story.
This is little 5-year-old Harmony Montgomery clutching her doll and smiling for the camera. When you look at this picture, everything seems very normal. Harmony seems happy and cared for. But sometimes pictures can be very deceiving because Harmony's world is anything but normal and happy. Her father has been arrested and charged with second-degree assault. The victim, his 5-year-old daughter, little Harmony. But that's not the most troubling part of Harmony's world. This picture is from 2019, and there are not any newer pictures of Harmony. The photographs of this little angel are all over 2 years old. That's because she's been missing since October or November of 2019.
Help us find this little girl. Someone knows something, do what is right, and call in. I cannot emphasize that enough. Somebody out there knows something. It's time for people to do the right thing.
According to a police affidavit, Harmony's mother, Crystal Sori, says she lost custody to Harmony's father, Adam, because she was dealing with a substance abuse problem. She says the last time she saw Harmony was a FaceTime call on Easter of 2019. Meanwhile, Harmony's father, Adam, says Crystal picked up Harmony for Thanksgiving in 2019, but Adam's girlfriend at the time says Adam told her he dropped Harmony off at Crystal's. Now, back to the assault charges. Adam's uncle claims that Adam admitted to bashing Harmony around the house and witnessing Harmony being spanked very hard, forced to stand in the corner for hours, and scrubbing the toilet with her toothbrush. So while the court system is dealing with the charges against Adam Montgomery, the chief is still looking for this beautiful little girl in the photo.
Quite frankly, enough is enough. This is a 7-year-old girl. Let's find her, all right? Let's come together as a community and do the right thing. That's all I'm asking, and I don't think I'm asking a lot. If people think that I am, then I'll leave it at that.
Adam Montgomery, Harmony's father, is now facing 8 new charges related to firearms theft. According to police, these new gun charges are unrelated to the search for Harmony and stem back to sometime between September and October of 2019, when Montgomery is accused of stealing the weapons. Now, the complaint also charges Adam as an armed career criminal because he possessed a rifle after having been convicted of 3 prior felonies. He now faces mandatory minimums of 10 years and up to 40 years on the gun charges. All right, let's bring in tonight's guest. Joining me in Palm Springs, California, retired FBI special agent and producer on Indivisible Healing Hate, streaming on Paramount Plus, Bobby Chacon. In Salt Lake City, Utah, retired police commander and host of the Profiling Evil podcast, Mike King. And in Boston, Massachusetts, a great reporter with Boston 25 WFXT TV, Bob Ward, is joining us as well. Gentlemen, thanks to all of you for being with me tonight. Bob, let me start with you because you're on the ground close. You've been following this case for quite a while. First and foremost, is it safe to say that these charges are definitely not related to what's happened to Harmony?
As far as we know, these charges are not related to the disappearance of Harmony Montgomery. That's absolutely right. However, these charges stem from the Harmony Montgomery investigation. So I talked to the senior assistant of the New Hampshire Attorney General's office about this just yesterday, and I asked him about this, and he said basically they were looking at Adam Montgomery and his family at about the time that Harmony disappeared, so back in that 2019 time frame. And as they're investigating what Adam and his family were up to at that time, they started coming across this evidence about these missing weapons. Now, we don't know a lot about these missing guns yet. We know there are 2. There's a rifle and a shotgun. One weapon was found down in Boston. Another one was found up in Manchester, New Hampshire, in that area. There's also talk of a 3rd weapon that has never been recovered. We don't know who the weapons were stolen from. We don't know if they were taken from a gun shop or were taken from somebody else, but these are the charges that he's going to face. He's being arraigned tomorrow in Superior Court up in Manchester at 11 o'clock in the morning. And we're hoping that for the first time since Harmony Montgomery, we found out that Harmony Montgomery was missing, we'll actually get to see him in a court of law. He's been able to stay away from the cameras up until now.
What can you tell us about the search for Harmony? Now, again, this investigation is part of the investigation into what's happened to Harmony. That's where these charges are coming out of that investigation. Right. What do we know about where they are in terms of perhaps finding Harmony?
Well, we do know that the physical search for Harmony Montgomery ended back in January. That's when the FBI and the Manchester police searched the house on Guildford Street in Manchester where Harmony was living with her family around the time that she disappeared. They searched that house for about 4 or 5 days, and they did not find Harmony. We don't know what they found, but they did not find Harmony. So since then, authorities have been very quiet about what they've been doing. But one interesting thing is, just yesterday when I was up in New Hampshire, I asked about the search, and I asked about that tip line. $150,000, an awful lot of money. Why is it that no one is coming forward telling them something? The AG's office told me 2 things. One is that they think that there are people out there with information who may not be maliciously hanging on to it, but just don't know enough to come forward. So that's number 1. Number 2, they said they got new information just last week because of that tip line, because of that $150,000. They called it serious information. Wouldn't go any further than that, but they're saying that they are getting good, credible tips even now. And I did ask, do you feel confident that you have a clearer picture of what happened to Harmony? And the answer to that was, yes, we do.
Bob, I was listening to the press conference announcing the charges or the additional charges against Adam Montgomery, and there was a statement made that there was some good information gotten about where Harmony could be or what might have happened to Harmony from that investigation into the guns. Do you know anything about that?
All I know is that they're talking to a lot of people around Adam Montgomery and Kayla, who is his ex-wife. Hesitate to use the phrase stepmother because of what's happened, but she was the mother figure in the house at the time that Harmony disappeared. That's Kayla. Kayla is in jail right now. She's charged with welfare fraud. She was cashing some welfare checks that belonged to Harmony after Harmony disappeared, allegedly. So Kayla is in jail. From what we understand, that neither one of them is telling them about what happened to Harmony. But we know that they're talking to other people around them. They're finding new people. They're finding people that Kayla and Adam spoke to, were friendly with. And they're trying to reach as many of those people as possible to see if Adam or Kayla said something about Harmony that changes what we know. The senior assistant New Hampshire Attorney General that I spoke to yesterday said that they are getting a clearer picture of what happened to Harmony.
All right,
of course, there's no new official search, but that's what they're saying.
Well, that's absolutely great news. Bob, stand by. I want to get my investigators involved in this. Bobby Chacon, Mike King. Bobby, let me start with you. This idea of going into and digging into and intensely looking at the past of Adam Montgomery around the time of the disappearance of Harmony, it makes fantastic sense. I wasn't even thinking about it in those terms, but if you can get into his activities during that time, they may be able to trace what happened to Harmony.
Sure, because he's a career criminal, so he's obviously carrying out these criminal activities, and I don't think if he did something to Harmony, disposing of Harmony's body would go along with some of his other criminal activity. Where he's carrying out that activity, who is he carrying out that activity with? So we all have a life where it's pretty routine. So you look into his routines. This person's routine was criminal activity. So they're looking at that and seeing if doing harm to Harmony and then hiding her body could have been part of this routine. So that's why they merge together. They merge what he was doing in his criminal life, because he's a career criminal, he's a liar, he's a coward. I mean, what kind of man punches a 5-year-old girl in the face? So I think that this guy, he's not very smart, and I think that they're looking at things that he might have said to people, even if there are people that have talked to him, even if he didn't mention this, don't self-censor yourself. If he said something, just call the authorities, let them know, let them piece it together. Even if you think it's not important, even if you think it's not related, let the authorities figure it out and see if it's related, because they have a whole lot more information than we know and that's been put out to the public.
Yeah, and they're being very close to the vest on this, which makes a lot of sense. Bob, you actually broke a story a while back regarding Adam Montgomery being connected to a murder in 2008. And this goes to Bobby's point about this guy just being just not a very good guy. Do you know the latest on that, if they're still investigating or where the investigation stands on that?
Well, it sounds like that the investigations are going on in separate silos, if you will, because I asked that. I wanted to know, have the authorities in Massachusetts been in touch with the Attorney General's office in New Hampshire? Are you coordinating this, trying to move the ball forward? And they said they are not talking to Massachusetts. The last I heard from Massachusetts, from the detectives working the case on this end, they said that they called up to Manchester when all this began, gave them a courtesy call and told them, hey, that's the guy we're looking at for this murder back in 2008. So they are aware of each other, but so far there's no coordinated effort between the two states. New Hampshire it looks like they're taking the lead because they've got the open case right now. They've got a missing little girl, and they're doing everything they can to try to find her.
Bobby Chacon, and again, referencing that press conference that I watched earlier regarding these new charges against Adam Montgomery, one of the things I made a note of something that was said, and they were terming the search for Harmony Montgomery, they termed it a rescue mission. Now, you're someone that's been involved in this type of thing. What does that mean, a rescue mission? Does that mean they're optimistic they might find her alive?
Well, it certainly would seem that way. I mean, look, the statistics are not good in this type of case for a successful outcome of finding this little girl alive. Now, that's, we all the time we're surprised. We've had cases here in California where a girl's found 19 years later. And so, there are cases where it happens. And in this particular case, I'd be very surprised if there's a successful outcome like that, but I don't know what's in that investigative case file. I don't know what they know, obviously. And so I'm hopeful that those words that because I picked up on those same words, and I'm hopeful that those words mean they think, there's a chance that he might have either sold this child for money or trafficked her so that she's still alive somewhere. That's my hope.
Yeah, when I heard the rifles and the stealing of guns and thinking about a child, I'm thinking maybe there's some bartering going on, which I think in the long run, it's not a wonderful result, will probably be a decent result. Mike King, what are your thoughts on what's going on now? This Adam Montgomery guy facing new charges regarding these guns and the search for Harmony Montgomery being called a rescue mission now. So that's pretty interesting.
I think it's really optimistic that they're calling it that, and hopefully they have information that's leading them to use those terms, and it's not just something that just came out without really thinking it through. I got to think that they do have some information there, but we got to go back and look at this guy's history and the fact that he has a history of gun violence. He has a history of aggravated robberies. He has a history of these assault charges. There's this thing that we talk about all the time when we look at these cases, and that is that past behavior is always predictive of future behavior. And so we think about what this child may have gone through. I don't know that she was ever pushed into that kind of a situation where there was gun violence with the child, but certainly this was a violent household. This was a violent individual based on things that we know about him. And so I keep going back to, I'm thrilled with the idea that there's searches going on. I know that there was a group of citizens that went out again last weekend and tried to look for this little girl. Hopefully it's being coordinated with local authorities and it's being done in the right way. But I got to keep going back to the fact that this child disappeared for 2 years, Michael. 2 years that there was no accountability. And I'm seeing lots of finger pointing going on from the parents, the family, the extended family, state to state. Bottom line is 2 years she was failed.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, all the fingers are pointing, and I think everyone has to account for what happened to this little girl. Hopefully things will turn out well when they ultimately find her. Bob, you touched on this earlier. There's a court date tomorrow for Adam Montgomery. What are we expecting to happen tomorrow?
Well, he will be arraigned on these new charges, and we're hoping, as I said before, that we'll be able to finally see him. When he was arraigned on the assault charges back in January, he was allowed to stay down in the basement in his jail cell. He waived his right to a bail hearing, so he did not even have to come into the courtroom, so we never saw him. We're not sure if that'll replay tomorrow or if he's going to do a video link from the jail where he's been sitting since January. He's held without bail. He's not going anywhere. So he's still held. And so he's going to be arraigned on these charges tomorrow in Superior Court, New Hampshire. We understand that the affidavit supporting these charges is sealed right now, and it may remain sealed tomorrow. So I'm hoping that changes because I need some information on what's behind these gun charges. So we're hoping, I'll be there. I'm going to be there at 11 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to be there, and I'm hoping to finally lay eyes on this guy.
Yeah, you've been doing a fantastic job reporting on this case. You'll be there tomorrow. Maybe we'll be able to get you back for an update, but we'll certainly be updating our viewers on what happens tomorrow in court. Bob Ward, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Truly wonderful to have you on the show. That's from WFXT up there in Boston. Bobby Chacon, Mike King are going to be staying with me because when we come back, it'll be time to open up our unsolved case file. And tonight, we're focusing on the 2016 disappearance of Karina Mcclurkin. We'll show you the details surrounding this case and speak with Karina's grandmother when we return.
Natalie from Copperfit.
Johnny was hitting me, and he was hitting me hard and repeatedly.
Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard.
This is going to be one of those big trials to watch.
You have these big celebrities that are going to be testifying.
Their reputations are at stake.
Johnny Depp was not successful across the pond, but he's got a second bite of the apple, this time in the United States.
Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard. Live coverage starting Monday morning at 9/8 Central on Court TV.
Welcome back. Now is the time in our show when we open up our unsolved case file. And tonight, we're taking a look at the disappearance of 18-year-old Karina Mcclurkin, who vanished after attending a party on October 11th, 2016 in Kokomo, Indiana. Reporter Nikki Dimitri with our great affiliate WRTV has more on this story.
On October 11, 2016, Karina Mcclurkin was last seen on South Washington Street here in Kokomo. In the 5 years since, her family and friends have never stopped looking for her, and they're praying they find her soon.
It's just embedded in my mind. It's just embedded.
Jerry Mcclurkin can never forget the day her granddaughter disappeared.
This is how she usually looked, right here.
Karina, just 18 at the time, disappeared after a party. Police say she was last seen walking down South Washington Street in Kokomo, a few blocks away from Foster Park, where I met with her grandmother.
I drove with the same pictures in my car for 5 years in my windshield. And I still have people to this day from Kokomo come up and ask me, what's wrong, where's she at? And I have to tell them we don't know.
Karina is a sister, an aunt, a daughter, and a granddaughter. Her family says they've looked for her tirelessly these last 5 years.
Over 500 miles in and around Kokomo, from Jonesboro to Burlington, Peru, to past Alto. We have covered every woods we drive by. We would stop and knock on doors and see if we could walk through them woods.
Kokomo Police tells WRTV Karina's case remains open and active. The department notes investigators, quote, have pursued numerous leads and tips.
We want her back.
But that's not enough for Karina's family and friends.
I don't even have any hope left. I'm tired.
They want both the police department and community to step up.
Well, I only remember her 2 days out of the year when everybody else is getting national coverage. Karina existed. She was not our imagination.
Jerry says she will never stop looking for her granddaughter, so her family will be at peace.
Not until the day I die. No, I won't.
If you have any information at all, please call the Kokomo Police tip line at 765-456-7017. All right, still with us, retired FBI Special Agent and producer on Indivisible Healing Hate, streaming on Paramount Plus, Bobby Chacon, and retired police commander and host of the Profile Evil podcast, Mike King. Also joining us now by phone in Kokomo, Indiana, is a special guest. Karina's grandmother, Jerry Mcclurkin, is with us as well. Jerry, thank you so much for taking out the time to be with us. We're here to help you. We're here to hopefully get you some closure in this situation. So thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, sir.
All right, let's start off by talking about Karina, what this is all about. I believe you had a special bond with her. I could see that in the story we just played. And I believe you had birthdays one day after the other, one day apart. Tell me about Karina and your bond.
Well, she was, sorry. She was a good kid. You know, she laughed a lot, she joked a lot, and she used to help me. I'd go pick her up, and she'd help me do things, you know, around the house and stuff. And she was just a joy to be around, and things just fell apart. She just took the wrong road and started running with the wrong crowd, and I just kept trying to talk to her, and she'd listen, and I'm sorry. We'd sit and cry together. She'd listen to me, you know, and then the last thing I have ever heard her tell me was, Mama, I'll be okay. But it didn't turn out that way.
Yeah. It's just heartbreaking. And don't worry, we understand the emotion. It's not a problem at all. At this point, I know you've been searching. You have not given up hope. Do you have any theories, or does anyone have any theories about what might have happened to Karina?
Sir, all I can tell you is what the police have told my son, which is her father. They called him in December of 2016, January 2017, and told him to come in and give DNA with the mother. He did, she did, and then they told him to look in the trunk, to start looking for her remains, because they found blood in the trunk of a car. And then another officer told my son to quit looking in the woods for her. So, you know, my son said, heck, we're going to look where we want to look, and we're going to go and we're going to do what we got to do to find my daughter. But they never did come back with whose car it was. They've never pressed any charges of the person that owns the car, nothing of the kind. I asked my son, when was the last time that he spoke with them? And he said, it's been over a year and a half ago, about a year and a half. And he called them, but he's never got any replies. They don't keep in touch with him to even say that they're still working the case. And it's just wrong.
Have they mentioned that they might have a suspect at all based on the car? Whatever. What about that?
Yes, they told my son the name of the man that did this, supposedly harmed Karina. They told my son his name. And why? And I asked the chief of police at the time, I said, why would you do that? Why would you tell a father the name of a man that murdered his daughter or harmed his daughter? Why would you do that? And everybody in Kokomo knows. Each one of the detectives I've spoke with has stated he did this, but they're not following up on it. My granddaughter went to get her hair done the other day at a beauty college, and she had to look up and look around, and there the man was styling somebody's hair. And she just happened to have Karina's shirt on. And she said he watched her the whole time she was in there. And it made her very uncomfortable. He's still walking the streets of Kokomo.
Unbelievable. I have a couple of investigators here on the show as well, Jerry. Maybe they can help us out with what might be going on here. Bobby Chacon, Mike King. Mike King, I'll start with you. You know, we hear this very often in this type of situation where police seem to have information, or there's pretty strong rumors in the neighborhood, but nothing seems to be done. What sense can you make of that?
I think it's really important to recognize that law enforcement is the fact provider, and it boils down to whether a district attorney or a county attorney is ready to file charges and whether they have enough evidence to step forward. It's really frustrating for us in the public, and certainly for Jerry and her family, because they want justice, and this beautiful girl deserves justice. But if they don't have enough and they lose that bite at the apple, there's no going back. And so sometimes it's a patience game. Sometimes it's just taking a little bit longer. The thing I don't understand is when law enforcement agencies don't have somebody in place to just kind of keep touch with the family and say, there's no more news at this point, but at least that family knows that they haven't been given up on. And I'll tell you what, this woman that's on this show with us tonight is a rock star in my book, and she may not remember me, but I remember her from 2 years ago when a team of divers showed up to volunteer and help and look in a murky, muddy mud puddle. And I think of my colleague Bobby Chacon here, who has led the FBI's dive team. Bobby, in this particular case, that grandmother that we have on the phone with us convinced this group of divers to get in the murkiest, muckiest pond full of snapping turtles you've ever seen. And I don't believe for a minute, Michael, that Jerry is going to give up on this case and give up on demanding justice for her granddaughter. And that's exactly what needs to happen. And people need to feel that same outrage that family does. And if you know something, even if it's goofy to you, make sure law enforcement is aware of it, and let's help bring this girl home.
Bobby Chacon, I want to get you involved in this. You heard that she feels like there's no line of communication between the agencies supposedly searching or investigating her granddaughter's disappearance. What can you tell her to maybe help open up those lines, or what can she do to try to get more cooperation and keep this alive in the law enforcement realm?
Well, Ms. Mcclurkin, I think you're doing exactly what you need to do. And when I saw you in that piece say you will never give up, I think that's the key. I think you're going to find that you are the person who pushes this case forward. It's a mystery to me why the police have acted the way they are. And like Mike said, most police departments have a special unit or special people designated to work with families and keep them abreast of what's going on in the investigation and talk to them certainly more than once every year and a half. You have to, even if there's nothing to be updated on, you make contact with the family, you say, we're still working on this thing. And it's a mystery why they haven't done that in this case. I think that it's incumbent upon, if your job, as it is to serve the public, that's part of that service, is to stay in touch with the families, let them know. In this, again, it's a mystery to me how they know the name of this person and they let the family know the name. That's to me not good practice. Because now the family is going to see this person and as Ms. Mcclurkin described, get in very, very strange and uncomfortable situations. And so I think that it's a real bizarre and mysterious way they're handling it. But I also agree with Mike, if they know they may just be missing that one little piece that the DA wants to put them over the edge to make them feel comfortable that they have enough to charge the person. Because it's all about, you can know who did something, but you need enough evidence that you can put in front of a jury to get the conviction. And those aren't necessarily the same thing a lot of times. So I think that, I think it's probably at the DA's office, they have a certain amount, but they may not have enough that they feel comfortable to lodge charges. And then, because there's a speedy trial rule, you have to go to trial right away, or you have to count on being able to go to trial right away. So it all depends on what kind of evidence and how much evidence that the police have turned over to the prosecutor.
Yeah, lots of factors play into that, Ms. Mcclurkin. And we only have a couple of seconds left. I want to give you the last word here. Any final words you want to leave our audience with?
I just need help. I need the FBI in here. I met with the mayor, Mayor Moore, the new mayor, and I told him, you have the power to pick up the phone and call in the FBI. And he has yet. He will not do it. They will not call in the FBI on this case. They say it's not necessary. The new law that they passed, my son called the state police or the sheriffs, whichever one it is, and they told him they would not look into it because it wasn't an accident. We don't know. We can't get anybody to look into this case. There's been 3 detectives retire and 1 got put back out on the street. And now she's with an ATF guy. I mean, who's handling it? And the prosecutor, all the police know this man. They all grew up with him. I think that's a conflict of interest. Up to the chief of police. They know this man personally. Why are they even on this case? Why can't they bring in the FBI? I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
All right, Ms. Mcclurkin, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're going to do everything we can to continue to help you to get this case out there and continue to tell your granddaughter's story until you and your family get the answers you need. Thanks again for joining us tonight. Truly appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
All right, you have a great night. And thank you to our investigators, Bobby Chacon, Mike King. Thank you for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you on the show as well. It is time now for a quick break, but there is still a lot more to come, folks. Here's a look at what's still ahead on Closing Arguments. In Sacramento, California, 2 suspects arrested in connection to a mass shooting that killed 6 people. We'll show you the video of the chaotic scene. And in Las Vegas, Nevada, a suspect is shot after charging towards officers. How did law enforcement handle this? Our experts weigh in during crime time.
Can you put me out on a 416, 2 males, and a 416 in front of Main and 4 Master?
Around 2 a.m. this morning, officers heard gunshots near 10th Street and K Street and saw people running. They were on scene almost immediately, and there they encountered a large crowd and multiple gunshot victims. Officers began to give medical aid, including CPR, to the victims that they found, and at the same time worked to stabilize the scene and learn what they could about the crime. What we now know is that 18 people were hit by gunfire. 6 have died. They were all adults. There were 3 men and 3 women.
That was Sacramento Police Chief Kathy Lester addressing the public following the mass shooting that occurred over the weekend, leaving 6 people dead. And of course, folks, it is crime time here on Closing Arguments, so let me introduce our law enforcement experts. Joining me, former police officer Lance LaRusso. Lance has over 36 years of experience in law enforcement. He has trained civilians, officers, and supervisors as a firearms and defense tactics instructor. He is certified in hostage negotiation, and he is the author of When Cops Kill and Blue News. Also with us, Assistant Chief Jailer and former Chief of the Major Crime Section, Lieutenant Colonel Adam Lee III. Adam served as a police officer for 30 years. He oversaw homicide cases, robberies, special victims units, and a gun assault team. And that's appropriate for our first story here on Crime Time tonight. And it's, of course, that mass shooting that killed 6 people and injured 11 more in Sacramento on Sunday. Now, 2 suspects, brothers, DeAndre and Smiley Martin, have been arrested in connection to that shooting. Smiley Martin was arrested today while hospitalized with serious injuries from the shooting. DeAndre was taken into custody on Monday, that's yesterday. Now, authorities say more than 100 shots were fired early Sunday near the state capitol, creating a chaotic scene with hundreds of people trying desperately to get to safety. Law enforcement officials called for the public's help, asking for photos and videos of the shooting, and the public provided more than 100. And we were able to obtain some of that video of the chaotic scene. Take a look at this.
Hey, what happened? Hey, you guys, what happened? Yeah, the shooting woke me up, but I wasn't sure if it was actual shooting. It was loud. It sounded like thunder. Well, it sounded like thunder, but then it just kept going and going and going. And I'm like, wait, is that even thunder or what is that? It was like, and then it went off again. And then you hear people running. Well, you don't hear people running, but it's screaming.
All right, so guys, you saw that video. You know the situation out there. Lance LaRusso, let me start with you. Responding to something like that has got to be incredibly difficult and chaotic. Tell me about the approach to a situation like that. Over 100 shots fired. You know folks are injured, people running around. You don't know who's who. Just an incredibly chaotic situation.
So a very challenging situation for law enforcement. Number one, they have to set up a perimeter. Number two, they have to try to get the scene safe so they can get medical personnel in there to treat as many people as possible. If you look at the number of shell casing, those little purple, I think, covers they had on the ground. An incredible number of shots fired. This department did an outstanding job. They had a QR code to allow people to upload videos. So, you know, they did a fantastic job here. But, you know, important thing to remember, these officers, these technicians, these evidence technicians, they're sitting in the middle of this. This takes a toll on these officers every day. And we see these videos marked, you know, caution may be disturbing. This is the reality that they're dealing with and in their jobs every day.
Yeah, that's a great point. You know, it's something we don't often think about, the first responders, the folks out there who are dealing with this stuff every day. Lieutenant Colonel, I want to check in with you about the investigation now. We heard that there was a call for help. People provided hundreds of videos, not hundreds, but over 100 videos, photos, information. How do you begin now sorting through all that information? They've already arrested 2 people who are involved, but I'm sure there were many, many more.
Well, first you have to collect all the evidence that you know you have, such as the shell casings on the ground or anything that may have been left behind by one of the suspects. It's a very big crime scene, so you have to branch out possibly 2 or 3 blocks to look for evidence. And then you start looking at the evidence that you don't have. Cell phone recordings, like the one I believe that's going to be a cell phone we're watching there. You know, who may have been out there with their cell phone? You know, almost everyone has a cell phone nowadays, so the chances of getting video from different angles is pretty good.
Yeah, and as I said, they have 100 videos right now, or over 100 videos from folks who provided that to police, so they'll be going through those, trying to figure out as much as they can. All right, Lance, please stand by. Adam, please stand by. We're going to squeeze in a break right now, but when we come back, we'll take a look at some video coming to us out of Las Vegas, where a suspect runs towards an officer and then ends up getting shot. We're going to break that down when we come back. Welcome back. It is still crime time here on Closing Arguments, and still with us are our law enforcement experts, Lance LaRusso and Lieutenant Colonel Adam Lee III. All right, gentlemen, our next story comes to us from the Las Vegas Metro Police Department, where a suspect runs toward an officer and gets shot.
An officer was on routine patrol in the 1500 block of North Main when he observed two subjects in a physical altercation. The officer stopped his vehicle, exited his vehicle, and attempted to intervene to de-escalate the situation.
324 PD back on channel. Can you put me out at on a 416, two males and a 416 in front of Main and Four-Master break?
One of the subjects complied, but the one suspect became aggressive and charged after the officer. The officer deployed his expandable straight baton, issued verbal commands, and created distance by retreating in an effort to de-escalate the situation.
324, get back, you're gonna get shot. Who's got a taser?
The subject retrieved an item from his pocket and held it in his hand as if it were a weapon. The subject continued to charge at the officer as the officer continued to create distance and back away from the suspect. At one point, the suspect charged at an officer. The officer lost his footing and fell to the ground. The suspect continued to charge at the officer, still holding the item in his hand, and the officer fell to the ground, drew his firearm, and fired at the suspect. The suspect was struck. Officer then summoned other units to the scene. The suspect was taken into custody without incident.
All right, and our question for our law enforcement experts after watching this is, how did the officers handle this? All right, Lieutenant Colonel, let me start with you. Your thoughts on what we just watched.
I'm a bit perplexed because I think what I see is three officers there. Maybe they're from a different agency or something. Their uniform was different, but I'm wondering why the two officers didn't assist that one officer that he appeared to be charging in a better way. They just seemed like they were just spectators to me. And of course, the officer that ended up doing the shooting, I'm not going to presume. It would be very presumptuous of me to try to determine, what level of fear he felt that caused him to deploy his weapon. So I believe it was a justifiable use of force on his part, but I'm still perplexed by the lack of aid from the other two officers.
Yeah, I think those other two officers, they look like security guards. Actually, he's putting his hand on his waist. Yeah, you're right. They're not really helping out.
They have
Lance,
weapons.
I want to get your thoughts on this.
So it's an interesting situation we have here. A lot of times we see videos in low light or no light, which is where a lot of shootings occur. And this subject actually had a pen. The officer describes it on the radio a couple of different ways, as a metal object, or he didn't know what it was. But the actions indicate that it was a weapon and he was charging him with it. So rather than low light or no light, everybody's wearing sunglasses. I just came back from a conference in Las Vegas. We have very, very bright sunlight. So we have a situation where the officer has sunglasses on. He's trying to process what the suspect is doing. The suspect is continuing to press the contact, and he reasonably believed it was a firearm, or excuse me, a knife.
Unbelievable. I don't think he had much choice there anyway. This guy looked like he had it in for himself. All right, thank you so much, Lance LaRusso, Lieutenant Colonel Adam Lee III, for joining me this evening. Truly appreciate it. It's time now for a break, but don't go anywhere. We still need your help.